All right, so we're diving into something pretty fundamental today, creative writing.
Okay.
And I was thinking about it like this.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like when you want to build something really cool, right? You get your tools together.
Yeah.
Well, with creative writing, your imagination is the workshop, and words are like your building blocks.
Right.
It's all about taking those ideas you have in your head and making something completely new.
Absolutely.
Whether that's some out there story or just finding a new way to talk about everyday stuff.
Yeah, and one of the things that I find really interesting about creative writing
Mhm.
is it's like unlocking all these possibilities.
Oh, yeah.
It's this space where asking what if isn't just a question.
Right?
It's actually like a starting point
Yeah.
for exploration.
Yeah.
And as a lot of the stuff we've been looking at has pointed out, it lets you play around with ideas and see things from different angles,
Uh-huh.
which can be really insightful, not just when you're writing,
Oh, yeah.
but in how you approach the world, too.
Yeah. I mean, you're basically working out those problem-solving muscles, but in a different way, right?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting way to think about it, that problem-solving aspect.
Yeah.
Because you're faced with challenges in your story, whether it's like figuring out what a character's going to do or a plot twist.
Right. Or how to get them out of some jam.
Exactly.
And you got to imagine your way through it.
Yeah, you have to come up with creative solutions.
It's almost like a mental playground to try things out and see what sticks.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, in what other parts of life could that imaginative problem-solving approach be helpful?
Oh, totally.
Like, does writing these narratives, even made-up ones,
Mm-hmm.
train your brain to be more creative when you face real-life problems?
Right.
I think it might.
I think so, too.
Yeah.
And, if you've ever felt like learning about language
Yeah.
can be a bit dry, all those grammar rules,
Mm-hmm.
creative writing injects like a whole bunch of fun into it.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like those words and sentences, all of a sudden,
Yeah.
they become tools to create worlds and express feelings in such a vibrant way.
Yeah.
So today we're going to explore all sorts of creative writing,
Okay.
from classic storytelling in fiction and memoirs
Right.
to the really focused artistry of poetry, the world of plays, and short stories.
Yeah.
We'll even touch on how that creative spark find its way into song lyrics and personal journals and stuff.
Yeah, because it's worth noting that each of these forms offers like a different lens to look through,
Right?
to engage with language and express what's inside,
Yeah.
whether it's the big canvas of a story or the really tight form of a haiku. They each give you unique creative chances.
Okay, so let's get down to the core of storytelling stories themselves.
Okay.
Whether you're into fiction,
Mm-hmm.
where your imagination can run wild, think dragons, time travel, anything you can dream up,
Yeah.
or creative nonfiction, where you take your own experiences and shape them into stories like memoirs. There are some basic elements at work in both.
Yeah, and across all the different sources we looked at,
Uh-huh.
3 things consistently popped up as the foundation of good storytelling.
Okay.
Characters, setting, and plot.
Got it.
Kind of like the 3 legs of a stool.
Right.
You need all of them for a solid narrative.
So first up, characters.
Yeah.
These are the people or creatures or even imaginary beings that your story revolves around.
Exactly.
You'll often have your protagonist, the main character,
Mm-hmm.
the one we follow through the story.
Right.
And sometimes you'll have an antagonist, the one who might cause problems.
Yeah, the one causing conflict.
But here's a key takeaway that came up a lot in the material we looked at.
Okay, what's that?
Making those characters relatable, even if they're like totally made up.
Yeah.
That's what really pulls the reader in.
It's true.
Think about their little quirks. What makes them tick,
What I find fascinating is how a well-developed character can almost take on a life of its own.
Oh.
As you're writing, their motivations, what they want,
Right.
can steer the story in ways you didn't expect.
Oh, for sure.
So when you're thinking about your own writing,
Yeah.
ask yourself, what are those deep desires and fears that drive my characters?
Mm-hmm.
Because those inner drives often lead to some really compelling actions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
Next up, we've got setting.
Okay.
This is the when and where your story takes place.
Right.
It could be somewhere familiar like your hometown, or as out there as a spaceship, orbiting some distant star.
Or even a specific point in history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But setting is more than just background, right?
Right.
It can have a big impact on the mood.
It can.
Think about a dark forest versus a sunny beach.
Yeah, they evoke completely different feelings.
Totally different vibes.
Yeah.
And setting can also shape what your characters can do,
Exactly.
the possibilities and limitations they face.
Think about it in terms of your own life.
Mm-hmm.
How different environments affect your mood and how you act.
Yeah.
It's similar in a story.
Okay.
The setting can help or hinder the characters.
Right. It's like another character almost.
Yeah, in a way.
And then, of course, there's plot.
The backbone of the story.
Yeah, the sequence of events, the whole adventure that unfolds.
From beginning to end.
Exactly.
And most stories, based on what we've seen, follow a pretty common pattern.
Okay.
You meet the characters and the world in the beginning.
Right.
The middle is where all the action and challenges ramp up, often building tension.
Yeah.
And then the ending brings some kind of resolution.
Right.
And a lot of the sources really emphasized how important that structure is.
Yeah.
It's like a roadmap for your narrative.
Yeah, it keeps things moving.
It does.
And creates a cohesive experience for the reader.
Exactly.
So think about the stories you love. How do they usually unfold across those three parts?
Yeah, that's a good exercise.
And building on that middle part, almost every story has a problem or conflict.
The thing that throws a wrench in the works.
Yeah, it's the challenge the characters have to face.
Right.
It could be as simple as losing something,
Yeah.
or as complex as some internal struggle. That problem is what keeps things interesting and makes you want to keep reading.
It's what raises the stakes.
Exactly, and it makes you wonder, what are they going to do?
Exactly. It keeps you on the edge of your seat.
And this brings up a good point.
What's that?
What makes a story captivating as opposed to just blah? A lot of it has to do with the nature of the conflict.
Right, the intensity of it.
A well-defined problem.
Yeah.
One that really matters to the characters. That's key for getting the reader emotionally invested.
It's true.
And of course, every problem ideally leads to a solution or resolution by the end.
Right, a way to tie things up.
Yeah, this is how that conflict gets addressed.
Yeah.
Now, a good resolution doesn't always mean a happy ending.
No, not necessarily.
But it should give you a sense of closure.
Right, like everything has come full circle.
And it should feel like a logical outcome of everything that happened before.
It's worth pointing out, as some of the sources did, that a really satisfying resolution feels earned.
Oh, yeah.
Like it wasn't just handed to the characters.
Right.
The things they did throughout the story, their choices should lead to that resolution.
Okay, so let's switch gears a bit and talk about poetry.
Right.
This is a really special way to use words.
It is.
Almost like painting with language. And it often focuses on really strong feelings, creating vivid images, and giving us new ways of seeing the world. And the sounds and rhythms of the words are so important in poetry.
Oh, they really are.
What I find fascinating about poetry
Yeah.
is how incredibly diverse it is.
Yeah, it's not just one thing.
Not at all.
It's like this huge tapestry of different forms.
Right.
Each with its own set of rules and expressive potential.
Exactly.
It's amazing.
So you've got rhyming poems where the sounds at the end of lines echo each other to create a musical effect.
Right.
Like classic pairings, tree and bee.
Yeah, those familiar rhymes.
And then there's free verse,
Right.
which doesn't have those strict rules about rhyming or rhythm. It lets the language flow more naturally.
Yeah.
And we've got playful forms like acrostic poems
Well, yeah.
where the first letter of each line spells out a word.
Right.
And the structured brevity of haiku with its 5 syllable count.
Very concise.
Yeah.
And then, of course, who can resist a limerick
Oh, limericks, yeah.
with that humorous rhythm and the AABBA rhyme scheme?
Yeah, they're so fun.
They are.
And for a more visual approach, there are shape poems.
Also known as concrete poems,
Right.
where the words are arranged on the page to actually form the shape of what the poem is about.
It's like poetry meets visual art.
Yeah.
And the overview of all these different types of poems really highlights how form and content work together.
Yeah.
Like the structure of each type of poem often influences the kinds of ideas and feelings that can be conveyed effectively. So when we talk about the musicality of poetry, rhythm is super important.
It is.
It's that underlying beat created by the stressed and unstressed syllables in the words. Read a poem out loud.
Yeah.
And you can often feel that rhythmic pulse.
Yeah.
And then there's rhyme.
Right.
The repetition of similar sounds.
Usually at the end of lines.
Yeah.
Which adds that pleasing sonic quality. And it can make a poem easier to remember.
Sure.
What's interesting is how playing around with rhythm and rhyme can change how a poem makes you feel.
Yeah, how so?
Like a strong, regular rhythm can create this feeling of energy.
Yeah.
Whereas if the rhythm is irregular, it might make you feel uneasy or more introspective.
That's so cool how those little tweaks can have such a big impact.
It is.
Okay, let's move on to writing that's meant to be performed.
Play scripts.
Yeah, play scripts. So these are written specifically for actors to bring to life on a stage.
Yeah.
The basic elements include characters, just like in stories. Dialogue, which is what the characters say.
Right.
And it's written with the character's name followed by a colon.
Yeah, to make it clear who's speaking.
Exactly.
And then there are stage directions.
Right, usually in italics and brackets.
Yeah.
And those give instructions to the actors about their movements,
Right.
their facial expressions, sometimes even how to set up the stage.
And what I find really interesting about play scripts is that they completely rely on action and dialogue to tell the story.
Right.
Unlike a novel, you don't have a narrator explaining things or telling you what characters are thinking.
Right.
Everything has to come through what the characters do and say.
You're showing the audience what's happening instead of telling them.
Right.
Now, if you're looking to explore a story in a shorter format, there are short stories.
Short but powerful.
Yeah, they're shorter than novels and often focus on just one main event or idea.
Right.
But don't think that means they're simple.
Oh, no.
Short stories can be super powerful.
They can.
They still have a beginning, middle, and end, just in a tighter package. And the material we looked at had some really good ideas for where to find short story inspiration.
Oh, like what?
They can come from personal experiences or be inspired by other stories.
All right.
Or even just pop into your head from a what-if scenario.
Yeah, those can be great.
Writing prompts can also be fantastic for sparking ideas.
Like that one we saw about a wizard finding a lost puppy at a school.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And when you're tackling a short story, it can be really helpful to think about that core structure, the initial setup, the main problem, and the eventual resolution.
It gives you a framework to work with.
Yeah, it makes the writing process a lot less daunting.
So, thinking about all these different forms of creative writing, there's some fundamental advice in the sources for how to get better.
Okay.
One really important concept is show, don't tell.
Oh, that's a big one.
Yeah, it is.
Important.
Instead of saying outright how a character feels, you use descriptive language to reveal it through their actions and how they look.
Right.
So instead of saying he was angry, you might say his fists clenched and his jaw tightened.
That's so much more powerful.
It is.
It lets the reader actually experience the emotion.
Exactly.
Instead of just being told about it.
Right.
It invites the reader to engage more deeply.
Yeah, and to interpret those feelings for themselves.
And another crucial thing is using descriptive words.
Oh, yeah.
This can make all the difference.
It can.
Instead of just saying a house, imagine describing a dilapidated Victorian mansion with peeling paint and shadowy windows.
Right.
The more specific and vivid your language, the clearer the picture you paint in the reader's mind.
Exactly, and it makes it so much more immersive.
And finally, one of the best ways to become a better writer is to read a lot.
Oh, yeah.
By immersing yourself in other writers' work. You get exposed to all these different styles, techniques, ways of telling stories.
It's like osmosis.
Yeah.
You're absorbing all these lessons without even realizing it.
Now, we know that starting with creative writing can bring up a lot of questions.
Of course.
And our sources address some common ones.
Like what?
Like, how long should your story be?
Right.
And the answer is, as long as it needs to be.
Yeah.
To tell the story effectively.
Don't get caught up in word counts.
Exactly.
Just let the story unfold naturally.
And where do you find ideas?
Yeah, that's a common one.
The great thing is, inspiration is everywhere.
It is.
Your own experiences, observing the world, other forms of art, even those random thoughts that pop into your head, they can all be seeds for creative ideas.
They can.
And for those dipping their toes into poetry, remember, rhyme is a tool.
Yeah.
Not a rule.
Right.
Free verse shows us that powerful poetry can exist without it.
Absolutely.
And that daunting first step in writing a story.
Yeah, it can be intimidating.
Often it's just getting that initial idea down. A character that interests you, a setting that sparks something.
Right.
Don't aim for perfection, just start.
Yeah, get those ideas flowing.
And it's completely normal to hit a wall when you're writing.
Oh, yeah, writer's block is real.
Sometimes you just get stuck. And a good tip is to step away for a bit.
Yeah. take a break.
Work on a different part. Or even just talk through your ideas with someone.
Sometimes that can help you see things from a fresh perspective.
Totally.
And break through that block.
And please don't expect your first draft to be perfect.
Oh, no. It's called a draft for a reason.
It is.
Revision is such an important part of the process.
Yeah.
It's where you really polish and refine your work.
And even picture books, while they often rhyme, don't have to.
It's not a requirement.
The story and the illustrations are what really matters.
Exactly.
The sources also suggested that before you even start writing, asking yourself some key questions can really help.
Like what kind of questions?
Things like, who is my main character?
Right.
What do they want? What obstacles will they face? Yeah. How might the story end?
Those are all good things to think about up front.
It gives you a framework and direction.
Exactly. It helps you plan your narrative.
And what about characters who aren't entirely good?
Oh, yeah, the flawed characters.
The material suggested that those can be super compelling. Their struggles and growth can make them feel more real and relatable. And for making your poems more engaging, play around with different forms, really pay attention to the rhythm and sound of your words, and use vivid sensory language to create those strong images in the reader's mind.
Those are all great tips.
Yeah, and I think it all comes down to this creative writing is your chance to be the architect of your own imaginative worlds.
It is.
So we've taken a deep dive into all sorts of creative writing today.
Well, yeah.
From those foundational elements of storytelling to the expressive power of poetry and the dynamic nature of play scripts.
Right.
Along with some practical tips and answers to common questions.
Yeah, hopefully this has sparked some ideas.
I hope so, too.
And inspired people to try their hand at creative writing.
Absolutely.
So as you keep exploring this fascinating world of creative writing, think about the power of details.
Okay.
How can one well-chosen descriptive phrase transform an ordinary moment into something truly unforgettable?
That's a great question.
And how does understanding how stories work enhance not only your ability to create them, but also your appreciation for the stories we encounter every day?
Yeah, the stories that shape how we see the world. Those are some really thought-provoking questions to leave us with.
I hope so.
Definitely gives us a lot to ponder.
It does.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
We'll see you next time.
See you then.